Good morning, my friends, my fellow vloggers and MERP enthusiasts and RPG brigaders and players of role-playing games galore. Welcome to another installment of the Batman GM's revisitation of Iron Crown Enterprises Middle-earth role-playing game. This particular one is called Shadow of the South. Now, this is a source book in the line of most source books in the game. It covers a fairly broad area of place of Middle-earth in some detail. Now, as tradition, it doesn't look like a lot. It looks more like the size of an average module that you would find in more modern games today, compared to the much bigger, thicker hardback source books that are traditionally created at this point in time. So be it. Anyhow, please excuse the drone in the background. That is the generator in the RV running. We're currently at a location where you couldn't plug in, so we're running our own generator for power. Modern technology needs modern conveniences. Plus, the heat in the RV is 50% electric, so it helps on these 20-degree plus whatever it is out there, Iowa mornings. Anyhow, okay, Shadow of the South is actually set in southwestern Endor, Middle-earth, the area where some of the so-called Southrons and stuff exist. It is actually a well-rounded source book, and it contains a lot of information in such a short package. So much that it's very difficult for me to give you a really, truly detailed review without maybe doing a pair of them, and even then it might not be. But what we're talking here is, it says, focus of southwestern Middle-earth, land touched by black legacies of Morgoth and Sauron, the graceful creations of the Avar elves, and the fiery passions of the men of Western Ease. Here between the great sea and the golden spires of the yellow mountains, the powerful seafaring Numerians and their relentless successors warred with the savage heritage. Okay, so briefly, this is an area that is dominated by both the cultures of the Numerian culture as it came out of Nurmur before the fall, and the local southern human cultures that existed when the Numerians set up shop. So you've got this very convoluted area of racial politics to deal with, and nation state politics to deal with. And that's one of the reasons I always liked this particular one. I played 2 campaigns in and out of this particular source book because of the level of opportunities to take advantage of. So it goes into a brief history where and it's conflicted because it's from the perspective, the book's written from the perspective of the Numerians. So, as if some Dunedain, some Gondorian or Anorian wrote this book, or some person from Nurmur wrote this book from their perspective. So when you look at the cultures that existed, then became subject races to the Numerians, later the Black Numerians, then you understand the context a little better. So it has a section for a timeline that runs about 3,000 years. It's actually a very well established neck of the woods. Talk about the 7 lands, section on chapter 3, the Yellow Mountains, the terrain, the Western Dominions, and it breaks it up into the various areas based on both geography and politics. So you've got Malador, Thorontor, the Elorian wetlands, the forests of Valgalon, and then the Eastern Dominions, Tergalon, Totham, Iman, Agwai. We got a nice little map that kind of breaks up some of it. There's a color map in here that goes with this source book too. It's up here in the overhead somewhere, I'm not sure. Then we go into the sub-chapters of, wind and water, talks to the Bay of Drill, the Herigar, which is the South Sea, the Beligar, flora, fauna, needs to get a page devoted to it, then people and cultures. This is where things start to get complicated. Now, we have in this area a well-established human civilization, a number of them actually in conflict to some degree or another. Many of them predate the Numerians' arrival, and then they still remember in their culture. They still remember when they were independent. And then there are some that are independent because their geology, geological locations make it harder for the more civilized countries to deal with them. And then we have the Funna elves, Fuina, pronounce it however you want. The Funa elves, the Funar, are Sylvian or Avor elves who live in the Great Forest of Valgalan and Drell. Like most of the Avari, they are extremely hardy and able to survive. These are basically your kin to the Wood Elves, Threndel's kingdom. This is more of their kind of elves. And truth in Lord of the Rings, in the Middle Earth gaming books, that the gray elves or the wood elves are the most common elves found throughout Middle Earth, and the reason for that is twofold. One, the high elves are the Noldar and their cousins. For the lion's share of them, very few of those enclaves went back east. They went west for a reason. They went to the Undying Lands, and then they were lured back to western Middle Earth to follow Fëanor and his sons to regain the Silmarils, and then that's a well-established historical story. So we understand that the lion's share of the Noldar and their cousins came back across the sea against the wishes of the Valor, and in the process fought some pretty vicious wars for a long period of time, and dwindled just out of sheer grinding down. Morgoth's forces ground them down, and then after the fall of the Bellerad, or however it's pronounced, the Western Middle Earth fell and was broken off, and Nurmur fell. The Nodar, the noble, the High Elves, as we know it, their culture continued to dwindle. We have enclaves of them at Rivendell and in the Blue Mountains, and we had at the I can't pronounce it, but and of course in Lothlorien with Galadriel, but we don't see very many others. So in this case, you would find them not, if you're looking for high elves in the east, you're probably going to find them in very tiny enclaves, or like Thundrel. Thundrel and Legolas are actually related to the High Elves. They themselves are considered High Elves, Noldar in some aspects, and traditionally, and in that aspect, a lot of the Avari, the Forest Elves or the Wood Elves, or the more common elf, have a tendency to accept the Noldar or their various cousins as rulers, and so you have this very tiny rulership case of High Elves surrounded by a bunch of Mid Elves, for lack of a better term. In this particular source book, they actually have a chapter and a half on the Fenari elves, and they are very well established in this particular region, which allows, one of the reasons I picked playing in this was because of this and because of the Dwarven presence. This allowed for the traditional, the atypical D&D style of gaming that most people that I played with were familiar with. So when I introduced them to playing in Middle-earth, they could relate to it a little easier. Much harder to do when you play in the West, because when you put together your traditional, PC party, and somebody wants to be the elf, well, that's okay. But when you're talking Western Middle Earth, it's not. While it's common, it's not as common as it would be in Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons, you just don't see. We don't play the awe factor. The average Joe commoner does not encounter elves on a regular basis. So when they walk into the village as part of a group, the reactions to them tend to be played down, and it's just another member, just another adventure. When in truth, there should be a lot of awe, or even some fear, or some combination thereof. Now, oddly enough, the dwarves are far more accepted by humanity than the elves are. The common, lower, the lower civilized humans, that is. High civilization's a different set of things. They try to emulate the elves, and in some aspects are more tolerant. And then of course, like I said, we got the mad lad dwarves, who occupy a region around the city of Black Flame and the Black Flame of the Yellow Mountains. These Negarium prefer the dry, dim environments. So there's the blah blah blah. Okay, we know that there's 7 major houses of dwarves. That goes with the canon of the 9, the 7, and the 3 rings. Blah blah blah. We know from gameplay and from reading that 3 of the Negarium houses exist in the west. There are 2 small houses that exist in the Blue Mountains in the ruins of the great dwarven cities of the First Age, and they very rarely get mentioned. The only mention to them is that Thorin Oakenshield and his companions, the refugees of the Lonely Mountain, moved to the Blue Mountains more or less, and went to live in and near these other dwarven tribes, more out of probably pity on their perspective, saying, well, the House of Durin's on its last legs, or it's on its last breath, so let's just, we'll let them settle over here next door to us and kind of help keep an eye on them. Whereas the most well-known is the House of Durin, which has seen its fortune continually dwindle to some degree. Now, the argument be made, well, what about the Dwarves of the Iron Hills? Well, the Dwarves of the Iron Hills are part of the House of Durin. This is why, Ironfoot is Thorin's cousin. He is of the Durin family line. So are those people. Those people were colonists, if you will, of Moria back in the day, and later the Lonely Mountain. But they established their own strongholds and their own culture to some degree. So they're not a client state, and they're not refugees. They are established in the Iron Hills, the Iron Hill Dwarves. Well, they could be their own house, but that's not how the Dwarven culture works. Okay, so that leaves the 4 other houses, and they're spread out in the east, and one of them is the Mad Bloods, the Mablad, Mablad dwarves. Okay, I don't want to get off into a tangent because I could do a thing on that. So, once again, like I said, this is a lot of material in here, trying to cover it in a short period. So, like I said, I'm going to have to probably do 2 of these to keep them short. The Politics and Power, Chapter 7, Shadow in the South, the Army of the Southern Dragon, the Cult of the Dark Overlord. Those are the Black Hand, the Black Dogs, the Eyes of Nazar, the Slayers. Then there's the independent factions. You see the sheer volume of political bodies and religious bodies and independent groups makes this for a very convoluted, very politically rich environment for certain types of gameplay. And I'm a big fan of that kind of gameplay. It's a matter of perspective, I guess. I don't want to get into a diatribe on that either. And I have my own opinions on how this stuff should be played out, a la Game of Thrones. Okay? In a single sentence in a Game of Thrones. It's like somebody asked, well, can you give me the premise of your own game system? Sure. It's like Game of Thrones set in space in the future. Right? Okay. There you go. So I want to end this section, I think, dealing with, I have to come back to this stuff because there's so much good stuff. So much good stuff. But there's one that's 2.5 pages just on this feller alone. This guy is a Cor-Harel the Nuzgul. This is the 5th Nuzgul the 5th human to accept the ring, but he is the 2nd Numerian lord corrupted by Sauron's the Lord of the Rings. And he's actually the cousin of the Witch King of Angmar. And this guy was born in Nuremberg. His family was given a royal license to come to the east and establish a client state, basically a kinglet or a kingdom that was going to be answerable to Nuremberg. And so that's what they did. And he came here and he loved the land, but he couldn't get along with the people, and he became a holy terror. He also dabbled in magic and other mysteries, and started to lament the fact that his father didn't seem to want to die anytime soon. He wanted to be the king, and he wanted to be the king pretty badly. And as time went on, it became worse. He eventually became the Stormlord. This is before he became a Nuzgul. And this fellow was approached by, originally managed to accept a pair of gemstone magic eyes. So he replaced his eyes with these magical orbs that theoretically made him physically blind, but opened his mind to much more things. So he could see things far clearer in other aspects. And I don't mean like the visual range. He could see through his magic, but he could see things uh, like a seer to some degree. And he understood magic even more than he did prior. And then this allowed him to take over from his father's kingdom. Basically, he killed his dad, arranged for it to happen, took over, and then his little kingdom started conquering its neighbors. At some point, it became such a threat to other client states of Sauron that Sauron had to act. Instead of wiping him out, he sent envoys to this guy, offering him even more power, magical abilities, and the promise of immortality. And the Storm King couldn't turn it down, accepted the ring, and became the fifth of the Nazgul. So there you go, in a nutshell. This guy is what you consider a black Numerian. As I said in a prior blog, that the Numerians, any Numerians who come under the influence of Sauron or no longer follow the tenets of Numeric proper become considered black Numerians. These guys are considered black sheep by the Gondorians and Honorians and the not, I guess, the white Numerians, if you want to like that argue, the regular Numerians, although it is what it is. Anyway, so we get this guy, and we understand how he comes into creation and his power. It gives you quite a lot of detailed information on this fella and how his power and influence of this particular region of Middle Earth are almost mythical in some aspects. And then, because we go on to say, by second age 2250, the Storm King presided over a client kingdom that was ostensibly Dunedain, but was in fact Black Numerian. Averil ruled a domain that stretched from the Great Sea to the huge Bay of Ormel on behalf of Lord of the Rings. These strategic lands straddled all the routes across the Yellow Mountains and into their southernmost Middle Earth. Sauron's hopes of keeping the men of the west out of Far-Herod rested with his wraith servant. Preparation for conquest of the Herod and regions along the northern and eastern coast of the Ormel Sea, near completion when Averil declared himself an independent Nimror. And then shortly after that, Tar-Adenatumener, the Great of Nimrod, died, which was the first king of West and East passed without giving up his scepter. So this is still some time before the fall of Nimrod. And brings the two outfits into conflict, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, Acherel Hill fell at his kingdom, went north to join his master in Mordor before suffering the embarrassment of seeing his own capital razed. His flight into the brief era of Terador's independence and preserved the prospects for future Adan exploitation of Far-Herod and the lands of the south. So, guy rose up, tried to conquer, got his butt handed to him, ran home crying to his new master, become a flunky. So is the end of the story for that fellow. We know how his story ends at the end of the book, right? So, therein has the first half of this particular book, and we're almost 20 minutes into it. So, please come back and enjoy a second round of this particular source book.